Community Corner, we're going to head just south of Waycross Community Media to Mount Healthy. When you think of Mount Healthy, Ohio, you might think of a busy street like this one, with lots of traffic and lots of noise. But we are just a few blocks away from the peaceful 3.5 acres of Tikkun Farm. Tikkun means repair, and the first thing they had to do when they moved into this farm was repair the buildings. Now, however, they are repairing the community and repairing the lives of individuals through the many programs that they've developed.
I'm a pastor, and I have known for probably decades that at some point I was feeling called to create a ministry out of the church and out in the world. For a long time I had a particular vision of what that looked like, and then I met a man named Greg and we fell in love, and he lived in Cincinnati and I lived in Philadelphia, and he was converting old rundown buildings and houses and converting them into beautiful spaces and sort of creating a place for people to live in community together in Norwood of Ohio, which isn't far from here. And one day while he was looking through the listings for the next house that he was going to transform, he saw this listing for this farm. And he called and he asked me, do you think we should have a farm? And I'm a pastor, so I said, well, I think we should pray about that. And so I got really quiet and I just said, God, do you think we should have a farm? And immediately this voice that I've come to recognize as this sacred voice within me said, I want you to have that farm. And so we bought it, and that was in 2010. And so I wasn't looking for a farm. I didn't think I was going to be a farmer. All the things that I'm doing now I've never done in my life, hardly. And yet I just feel like I've been following the lead of the Spirit and sort of doing what the Spirit's called me to do. The first thing I felt like we had to do is give it a name. And again, I prayed for the name of the farm. And when we bought this farm, everything was falling apart. The farmhouse had been gutted. You couldn't live in it. There was no electric. Both of the barns had roofs that were leaking. They were falling down practically. The milk house was a cinder block building, so it was still sturdy, but it had no life in it. It had no water, no power, like nothing was happening there. And what I heard God say is the name for your farm is Tikkun, repair. It's part of a Hebrew phrase, Tikkun Olam, which means to repair the world. Repair your buildings, and then I'll send people here whose lives need to be repaired. So we started repairing the buildings, and the first thing we did was bring life to the milk house. And Deeper Roots Coffee is a beautiful artisan coffee roaster in Cincinnati, and they were just getting themselves started, and they needed a place to roast their first coffee beans, and so they leased that building, and so coffee was the first thing actually that got produced on the farm. And then after that, it was really a matter of saying yes to the things that the Spirit brought. So the next thing that happened is somebody called me up and said, I hear you have a farm, my farm's closing down. I have these 2 alpacas that need a home. Would you give a home to my alpacas? And I remember thinking at the time, like, what's an alpaca? Like, I have no idea what an alpaca is. And she says, like, it's a small llama. And I'm just like, really? Well, how much work is an alpaca? And she's like, well, you really just have to give them food in the morning and water and then bring them in at night. I was like, well, I guess we could do that. So we became the owners of 2 alpacas. And then somebody gave me their chickens at the end of the season when they didn't want to keep them over the winter. And then somebody gave me some of their ducks. And so we slowly began to get farm animals on the farm. And then children showed up, and they discovered that we had these strange creatures with really long necks that weren't giraffes, and we had these chickens. And so they came and discovered where we kept the food, and I think they thought they could help us. So they dumped out half the food on the ground and made a big mess. And then they wrote their names on the side of the barn. And then I went and I found them because they wrote their names on the side of the barn. And, he called his dad, and they came and visited the farm. And I just said, I really am glad you found our farm, and we want you to come to the farm, but we really don't want you writing your name on the barn, and we really don't want you dumping out the food. This is what we'd like you to do. Could you help us? This is how we feed the chickens. You just give them 1 scoop, and that's plenty. And I said, I'm about to go get little baby chicks, and would you help me grow them and help them, have food and water and change their bedding. So they came over almost every day and helped me take care of the baby chicks. And then they brought their friends, and then they were knocking on the door, and I was at work, and my husband was like, they just keep wanting to talk to you. And so then we realized we had to offer some sort of structured activity for them. And so that was, I guess that was like in 2016, we ran our first camp. Well, I had all of this fiber from the alpacas because we share them every year. And I got to know Susie DeYoung from La Soup, and she said, well, why don't we give you food that she had sort of rescued, and we started doing a version of her crock pot program. So that we did what we called a food and fiber camp. And so the kids came and we took rescued food and we showed them how to turn it into soup or something like that. And then they made some little project with their fiber. We showed them how to felt it. That fall, we decided to offer sort of a weekly cooking class after school. And then the next summer, I had left my job in the church I was working. I had the summer open, and we just did a full-on summer camp. And we really began to dig into what I thought of as our mission. God said, heal people. And so we really have a threefold focus: heal people, repair community, restore creation. And under healing people, I had learned a whole lot after we got started on the farm about trauma and the way it impacts the brain, the way it lodges itself in the body, and the things that are really most helpful to heal a body disrupted by trauma. And I knew that many of the kids in our neighborhood who were coming here were growing up in homes with toxic stress. And so I wanted to give them a chance to have some more of a healing experience. And so we decided to incorporate some of that stuff into our camp. So we moved beyond food and fiber, and we offered yoga when they first got here, and then we invited them to do creative writing, and we invited them to do art, and we gave them a chance to spend time outside with the animals. We had them spend time with a naturalist, all things that we know can sort of soothe an overly excited, overly stressed sort of body system. And then right about the same time that all of that was happening, I got an email asking me if I would make a home for Bhutanese refugees on the farm, because they, when they had spent their entire generations farming, and when they settled here in America after being in refugee camps for 20 years, the first thing they really want to do is dig their garden and grow their food. And most of the garden plots here in Cincinnati, we have a lot of community garden plots, but they were already full of refugees who had already arrived. And so they were running out of sort of community garden spots. And so somebody asked me if I would let my farm be used by them, and I was thrilled. So we had a Bhutanese family, like 8 brothers and sisters with all their kids, and some of their aunts and uncles move in here into the Mount Healthy area. So they would walk down, and they cleared the land behind me, and they established a little garden plot for every one of their family members, and we got to know them, and that was just beautiful. And so when our summer camp started, we were able to begin to live into this idea of what does it mean for us to repair community. So when I had my summer camps, I made sure that we had a really great, diverse community of students who were part of our camping experience. So we had Bhutanese refugees here, we had immigrants from Guatemala and El Salvador, we had African American kids from the neighborhood, we had European descended kids from the neighborhood, and we just put them all together, and every small group had this little mix of kids. And one of the Bhutanese refugees showed up for camp one week and said to her driver, "I'm not staying." And she said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because that boy over there beats me up at school." And the driver said, "I don't think that'll happen here. Miss Mary won't let that happen." And so she decided to stay, and they ended up in the same small group. And then that week, we had brought somebody in to teach the cooking class, and we were trying to teach different ethnic foods each week. And it just so happened that week we were teaching about Bhutanese momos. And so this African American young person got to learn how to make these momos and got to know that this was like the favorite food of this Bhutanese person who was in her class. And she said, "Guess what? We can be friends now, because I love your food, you know, and it's just this thing that happens, like food brings us together, and being outside does. So there was this healing that happened in that relationship. That was just a little microcosm of this larger thing that I really would love to see happen on our farm. And then restore creation. You know, how do we manage our land in a way that recognizes that there's a whole community actually that lives in the soil of microorganisms, and that when they're healthy, they produce nutrients that go into our food, which then feed us and the animals and make us healthy. And that means we don't put chemicals on the soil. That means we try not to disrupt the soil. So how do we plant food in a way that doesn't sort of constantly dig into the soil? So those are our sort of three focuses. Since we first started working with children and then the refugees, then we ran an after-school program, and we decided to take what we were doing in the summer camp and make it available all year round. So you did yoga every day, you did art once a week, you did cooking once a week, you did creative writing once a week, and that was a beautiful year. And at the end of the year, I prayed about how to sustain that, because it was really a lot of resources that were going into supporting it. And again, the Spirit said, it's time to do something different. I really want you to reach out to adults. I want you to work with parents of the kids in your program. I know that I grew up with a single parent, and I know that the parents of our kids, especially the African American women, are probably the least supported community in our area. We spend a lot of time judging them. We don't spend a lot of time supporting them. We started by offering a cooking class for these adults, and beautifully we built a relationship with a local food bank run by the Mount Healthy Alliance. It's actually a food pantry run by the Mount Healthy Alliance. They were bringing over all their surplus food. We were making it available both for the cooking class, and then anything that was extra, we just said to these women, just take it home. And my hope was that while they were here, they would learn a little bit more about toxic stress, about the long-term health impacts of toxic stress, about the things that help with toxic stress. So I introduced them to Tiffany, who is our yoga instructor. They got a little taste of yoga. And then I invited them to come back in the winter for a writing class, because writing is something that helps us give voice to the stories that sort of haunt us. And they did. The writing class was packed, and so we offered a second cooking class for new people, and then this writing class for the people who'd been here before. And then we were about to do it one more time. We're going to offer our third cooking class and another writing experience, and COVID hit. And so then the question was, well, now what do we do? And the chef who was helping me teach the cooking classes, Glenn, he said to me, he said, you know, these parents, most of their kids are getting 2 meals a day at school, and now they're going to be home and they're going to need a lot of food support. Like, what if we just take the surplus food we've been getting and we cook dinners for them? And I remember thinking, oh my Lord, like that's too hard. I thought to myself, that's what Susie DeYoung does. You know, Susie's a chef. She's got all these other chefs who work with her, and she takes all this rescued food and she makes beautiful, beautiful meals with them, and she feeds lots of people. And I thought, I'm a pastor. That's not my gifting. How do I do that? And I just called the chef back and I just said, Glenn, I just don't know. I said, I just don't think I can produce that much food. We don't have a commercial kitchen. He's like, no, we won't do that. We're just going to do what we've been doing all along. We're just going to prep the food and we're going to give it to them, and then they'll put it in their crock pot at home and they'll cook it for themselves. So that's what we did. We started to do that, and the first week we had 18 families who had all been a part of our farm in some way. Their kids had been to camp here, or they'd taken a cooking class, and we asked them, how would you feel if we dropped off the meal to you instead of you coming here to shop and vegetables and everything? And so they signed up. And so we sent out 18 meals that first week. And then the next week we sent out 40, because we asked them to find friends who could use it. And then other people started to sign up, and by the end of June we were sending out 300 bags, meal bags, crock pot meal bags to families. And that's 1,200 meals a week. And it's using food, so we built a relationship with a free store food bank. We were getting surplus food now from 2 local food pantries. And then we still had food that we weren't using in our recipes. So I just started to announce on Facebook, we've got extra food. If you need food support, come and get it. And so every Friday and Saturday, people who need a little extra food just come by here and they can take whatever they need. And it's not like a normal food pantry. Like sometimes food pantries say you have to be in our area, you have to demonstrate, you know, where you live, you can only come once a week, or once a month. And really, we are just trying to find a home for all this surplus food, and we can't use it, and we want other people to have it. So we don't care who comes and gets it, honestly, as long as it's going to get put to good use. That's what matters to us. Doing that is sort of what made it possible for us to do the 300 meal bags, because people were coming to pick up food, and then as soon as they put the food in the car, they would turn to me and say, "How can I help you?" And I'd just be like, wow, you know, well, we're about to send out, 50 bags this week, and I need somebody to chop onions and carrots and celery for the recipe. If I sent you home with a box, could you bring it back all bagged up for these meal bags? Oh, sure, I'd be glad to help you. And then other people were coming on Sunday and assembling the bags, and then other people were showing up Sunday night to go deliver the bags of food. And so by the time that we got to the end of June, we probably had more than 100 volunteers a week producing these meal bags for our families. You know, the rest of the world shut down, and we woke up in a whole different world and doing a whole different thing that I ever imagined we'd be doing. But it's turned out to be really important. You know, I've said this program has become a program that I say is we're nourishing people, body and soul, because it's not just a program that feeds people's bellies. It's not just putting food on the table, but it's also nourishing people who want to bless their neighbor, who want to love their neighbor, but who didn't know how to be able to do that during COVID, who sometimes didn't even know how to do it any other way. Some of our families who receive our meal bags are also the people who measure out the spices and chop the vegetables, and so they're receiving and they're giving all at the same time. And then they say thank you to me for being able to help their neighbor, and I'm just like, it's just a miracle to me. So when we bought the house, we knew that we were going to first roast coffee. We thought we might also do sort of aquaponics kind of farming. And I knew I was going to probably do some sort of ministry and leading retreats. We didn't know we were going to do any of the things that I told you about. We didn't know we were going to have alpacas. We didn't know we were going to have refugees. We didn't know that we were going to welcome children here. I mean, we just didn't know any of that. But we also knew that the coffee thing itself was going to be an anomaly in a neighborhood. And so we really wanted to have a good relationship with our neighbors. And so we bought the farm like in June, and we knew Deeper Roots was about to start roasting coffee in the milk house. And so we sent out a note to all of the neighbors on this street, and then all of the neighbors whose houses back up to our property on the street behind us. And we just invited them to come to the farm, and we just said, we'd like to introduce ourselves, we'd like to tell you what we're hoping for here. We'd like to get your input. And the house was gutted. It was cold, there was no electricity. We brought in these gas heaters. The Deeper Roots people brought in a generator so they could run their espresso machines. And they came. And then they came, and then they came, and we probably had 100 people in our living room. Everybody in the neighborhood wanted to know what was going to happen here. I think they were really afraid that a developer was going to buy it. It might turn into low-income housing or something along those lines. And so we said, well, we're going to roast coffee, and you're going to smell it in the community. They're like, oh, that sounds wonderful. And then when the children started coming, and they would walk through their yards or walk down the street, my neighbor across the street, when we did our very first food and fiber camp, he came with me to the school, helped me pick up the kids, walked them here. Our neighbors have been so amazingly supportive. I mean, I know that we've been disruptive, right? This is a sleepy little dead-end street. Many of the people who've lived here, I've lived here for decades. Some of the people moved here because it was a little sleepy dead-end street, and it's not as sleepy as it used to be. And it hasn't all been good. We've had kids who've come to our program who've been super, super respectful, but then their friends will follow them here and not be respectful. And we can't always control that. And I think our neighbors have handled that with a tremendous amount of grace. I think the thing that's been most challenging to our neighbors has been traffic. And so I think we're doing a better job of sort of managing that, because we want to be good neighbors to the folks who've been, I think, very gracious and welcoming of us and our strange creatures. And our neighbors have been, like this neighbor over here, Rick. All of us have these really long, narrow properties that go down this hill to the creek and then back up again. And our alpacas were overgrazing the grass that we had. And so we needed new grassy areas, and he has been so gracious and has just said, sure, I'm just mowing it, just put up a fence and you can have at it. And so we have 2 paddocks now in the back on his property for alpacas. Our neighbor on this side essentially said the same thing. She's like, I have this big long backyard, all I'm doing is mowing it because I only need the first half of my property. Would your Bhutanese refugees like to have more room to garden? And so she offered that whole back piece of her property, doubled the size of their gardens. I think our neighbors have been very, very gracious to us, and we're very grateful for their support. So we have big plans for our future. Right away after we bought the farm, my husband put a roof on this barn back here, and that completely saved the barn. The other barn was a much bigger barn, and it wasn't as old, and it had a funky shaped roof, and the way the water came in just did tremendous amounts more damage, and it got to the point where it started to separate, and it was just going to be so expensive to try to fix it that they just said, you just have to tear it down. So one of the sad things with this last summer was we had to take that barn down. But where that barn used to be is we always imagined that it would really be a ministry space. I mean, I imagined transforming that barn into a ministry space. And so now I imagine building a ministry space there. And that will extend the kinds of ministry that we can do here. So some of the things that we'll do there are run retreats. We hope to have individual offices so that people can have one-on-one visits with a counselor, or they can have healing touch, or they can get massage therapy done, because those are all things that we know help release trauma from the body. We'd like to have a commercial kitchen there, and we'd love to be able to start a Montessori preschool here and really serve the most underserved kids in our community, because getting those kids off to a great start makes such a big difference in their life, sort of for decades down the road. But even before we do that, the next thing that we're about to launch is sort of in honor of a young man who was a part of our farm. His name was Monty. His younger siblings were part of our after-school program, a part of our summer camp. He was a camp counselor here. He graduated from high school. He knew he wasn't wanting to go to college. He was looking for a job, and he didn't have a car. And transportation in our city is really bad, and it's really hard to get from anywhere. And so he got a job at McDonald's, but even though it's just one exit down, it was a huge effort to get there. And eventually he met other people who showed him that there were other ways to make money that could go faster and more money, and he got pulled into the drug culture, and last July he died in drug violence, and that was like, my heart had wanted to save him from that. I had done a lot of different ways of welcoming him to the farm that I thought would help him, but it wasn't enough. And we know that unemployment is highest among minorities, and we're not doing hardly anything to address that problem. We can say that the unemployment rate goes down for other parts of our community and other parts of the nation's populations, and it never goes down for minorities. And when you don't have a job, then why would we be surprised if they start selling drugs? And when you start selling drugs, you get involved in violence, and that ends you up in either debt or in jail, right? So, how do we break that cycle? So we break that cycle by providing employment. And so I'm right now in the process of trying to find folks who will invest in a aquaponics sort of job employment training program here. So we'll be able to run a system all year round. We'll teach a small group of kids in a sort of like a 3 or 4 month window. There'll be like a cohort. They'll get mentorship. They'll get to learn how to put an aquaponics system together. They'll learn how to take care of the fish, how to take care of the plants, how to market the plants, all of that. And also just how to show up on time and how to work with other people, how to problem solve, how to receive feedback, all of the things you need to do in order to be successful in your employed life. And then our hope is that after 3 or 4 months here doing that program, we'll be able then to launch them into that industry if they want to stay in the food industry in other parts of our city. We have places like 80 Acres and Brick Gardens who are all sort of looking for people with those sorts of skills. And so that's my hope, is that we'll begin to get some investment to do that. So I'm right now applying to the Greater Cincinnati Foundation for some funds. I got a grant from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Hunger Grant, which is some investment in that. And for me, it would be just the best way I know to sort of honor and celebrate Monty's life and sort of help the other Monties in the world that I don't know yet have like a different story, have a different outcome in their life. In addition to all those other things that are going on, we also have 3.5 acres of land that we're really trying to transform into beautiful ecosystems. So we have somebody who lived here for 2 years who did a lot of work in permaculture. He dug rain gardens so that when it rains, it holds the water and then it releases it to the ground. He put swales on our hills so that the water doesn't just run down the hill into the storm drain, but created gardens along those swales. We've dug ponds here, so before we just had grass, and now we have frogs and dragonflies and a whole bunch of other kinds of creatures that are thriving because there's now water on the farm in a way that there hadn't been before. And so we also are trying to continue to that work. That gentleman was with us for 2 years and he got us started, but we still have maintenance and things and ways that we're growing that. We just planted a milkweed garden to give sort of an environment for monarch butterflies. And so we have a group of gardeners who come often on Saturdays, but people can really come anytime, and we always have projects to do. Once a month we have volunteer days so that we can fix the fences to keep the chickens in the chicken yard, that we can sort of dig the next little garden that we're putting in or plant the plants that need to go there. You can come for a volunteer day. We also have, the only reason we can give out 300 meal bags a week is because we have tremendous volunteers who help with that. So we put together little kits of onions and vegetables or spices, and then people come up and they'll sort of take 30 onions home and 10 green peppers or whatever. They'll chop them up, they'll bring them back in their little bags, or they'll take home these 5 spices, they'll measure them out, put them in a little snack bag, and then they'll bring them back. And then on Sunday we have a different group of volunteers who just assemble the bags, get them counted out for our drivers, and then we have another group of volunteers who then come pick up 10 bags and go deliver them in the neighborhood. So we're always looking for people to help with that. Fridays and Saturdays we're giving out food, so we need people who can show up early, help get the food out of boxes, put it in the containers that feel like you're coming to a farmer's market, because we really want everybody who comes here to know that they're a guest, and that this is a beautiful space and that we value their presence. So those are some of the more tangible things. And then when we get back to gathering together, people who don't mind coming early to help set up for a retreat, or who don't mind sort of being in the background to help us set up and clean up after a cooking class. People, if you like to write, we always need people who help lead a writing class. We want to begin offering art in the same way to some of the people who come to our cooking class, and we try to introduce them to other experiences. So people who wouldn't mind teaching art for like a 4-week session, that kind of thing. I think the other thing that's happening that's new is that I always also knew that eventually, in addition to doing programming here, we would be a contemplative space. And we would be there'd be some kind of a spiritual community that started to grow here. And that's just started to happen. I know that the next season for us at the farm is, in addition to sort of this outreach work that we do, there's this in-reach work that we're also gonna do. And we're gonna learn how to live together and in community. We're gonna learn how to grow in our own spiritual lives in a way that is mutually supportive of one another as we're each on our own spiritual path. That spiritual work is really the groundwater for everything else. But we started out there, and we're now beginning to do this, create a space for this more inner work to happen. And that's a new season for us, and I'm really excited about that.
If you'd like to know more about becoming part of the repairing that's happening at Tikkun Farm, make sure you go to their website or follow their Facebook page for more information. And thanks for joining us on Community Corner.